If I can read my writing. I believe we're going to file item 103. That's AB 2607, and that is not without reference to file, members. That is file item 103. At the top of the file, AB 2607 by Mr. Ting. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 2607 by Assemblymember Ting, an action relating to firearms.
Mr. Ting, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 2607 amends current law, which currently allows law enforcement officials and family members to determine and apply for a gun violence restraining order with the court to get someone's guns removed for 1 year if they believe those people or that person will be a danger to them or others. This is a process that they have to go to court. It's not that anybody can do it. We are expanding it to include people who you work with, employers, coworkers, people who you might go to school with, a high school teacher, a college teacher, as well as mental health workers. Given that many people leave their families when they're in school, as we have seen with many incidents, including the one this morning, our college campuses, university campuses. That's why we included the school administration part of it. We also saw in the San Bernardino incident where people are around their coworkers much more than they are around their families. So we expanded it to coworkers as well as employers. This, again, is somebody has to go to court to get guns taken away for 1 year. And, again, the order can be revoked at any time. The current law is in effect, and many of the orders have been revoked because of that situation. So, again, respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Ting. Ms. Melendez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this bill will allow coworkers, mental health workers, an employer, all sorts of, basically everybody you come into contact with to say, I think the member from Oakland is a danger to society and he may hurt someone, and no offense, and therefore I think his weapons, his firearms should be taken away from him. And that's without any recourse on his part. So that means he has to wait 21 days before he gets essentially his day in court to give his side of the story. 3 weeks before he ever gets to say, hold on a second, I had an argument with this particular coworker. I had a falling out with my employer. This is an roommate who I had to kick out because they weren't paying rent. These are the sorts of situations you're going to find yourself in. So I understand that if you work with someone, you have a relationship with someone, you see them often where you can tell something's not right. That makes sense to be able to call law enforcement or mental health and say, you know what, I think we have a problem here. But I just, if you're not aware, I want to remind you that under Welfare and Institution Code 8100, it already provides that a person who communicates a serious threat of physical violence against a reasonably identifiable victim, in other words, you can kind of figure out who they're talking about, that a gun violence restraining order is an order in that particular instance. So you can already do this, but to broaden it and say anyone you've worked with, I mean, think about this now. Okay, it's anybody you're related to, it's anybody you've worked with, worked for, lived with, gone to school with. It's just about everyone. And this is really, really overbroad, given the fact that no proof is required. And you as the person who is accused of this, you get to say nothing. You are guilty until proven innocent after 21 days. That is not right. I urge a no vote.
Dr. Eggman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I regretfully rise in opposition to this bill. And my issue is more with the mental health providers. Mental health providers are already provided with the Tarasoff. If somebody is in danger, we have a duty to warn. We also have the ability to 5150 people. So I don't want to inflict the fear for people to go to therapy. I think more angry people should be going to therapy, not be afraid to go to therapy because they're afraid of the repercussions that may occur if they're honest about what's going on in their lives. Mental health providers, I think, already have enough coverage around drugs, both with the Tarasoff and with the Ability to 5150, that this, I think, would prevent or deter people, perhaps, if they're feeling angry, having issues, from going into therapy to receive mental health counseling and then just trying to deal with it at home. Thank you.
Mr. Chavez, you're recognized.
I rise in opposition to AB 2607, and I have a real personal reason on this. As a lot of you know, my son suffers from schizophrenia, and I often worried about it when this happened, because at the time he became sick, I had weapons in my house, and so we had to make a decision as a family what we were going to do with these, and we chose to remove them in order for his safety. But our current law already allows us to do that. It says right here, immediate family members and law enforcement officers can take this action to remove weapons. I think it's totally appropriate. I also agree with my member from Stockton who talked about the value of health providers. We need to provide more access to people who are suffering to feel that they can open up and freely discuss what they're doing to get better health. But I think what this bill is actually doing, I'm just going to call it as I see it, what this bill is actually doing is chasing the emotional fever that's going on right now on what if we would have known, or who could have seen this, or what's going on. And we start having neighbors looking upon neighbors. That's not too far from the book of 1984. When everybody's reporting on everybody else and everybody's worrying about everybody else. We have individual freedoms for a reason. People who have mental health issues need to also be free and have the opportunity not to be questioned or checked out by their neighbors. This bill is clearly an overreach. I think there's laws already on the books with their family members and law enforcement agents to take care of people like this. But to allow your coworkers or a teacher or somebody else to evaluate you who are not qualified to evaluate you and then subject you to the stress of being labeled until you have an opportunity to prove yourself innocent is just wrong. Members, this isn't about a gun bill. This is about the rights of an individual, respecting those who have mental health issues. Let's don't start laws labeling them. This is a far, far overreach. I really, really ask you from a personal standpoint to oppose this bill.
Mr. Allen, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. AB 2607 very clearly infringes upon a person's right to bear arms. That right is our Second Amendment of our Constitution, and it reads, permission to read?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I have a question to the author.
Without objection.
In your personal opinion, should we modify or repeal the Second Amendment?
I'll answer that on my close.
On my own time. The author has chosen to answer that in his close, but I would contend very simply this. It's not only this bill that infringes upon your Second Amendment rights, it's this entire package of bills that's being proposed today and voted on today and was voted on previously in the Senate. The Second Amendment is very clear that we have a right to keep and bear arms. We have a right to transfer those arms, but we have a right to bear those arms. This bill directly contravenes that, and I would challenge anyone who votes for this to ask themselves, if they could, would they repeal or would they change the Second Amendment? I look forward to your answer and urge a no vote.
Mr. Stone, you are recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker. It's interesting listening to the debate here on the floor. When we were talking about the physical parts of a gun, the comments were made, it's not the gun itself, it's the individuals. This bill is an opportunity to focus on those individuals. And it's those individuals who know a potential threat, who know someone the most, who are asked to then be able to report and seek a gun violence restraining order. Remember, this still has to go to a court. A court is reviewing that situation. It's not a threat to the Second Amendment. Constitutional rights specifically allow time, place, and manner restrictions. This is a time, place, and manner restriction. It's a short term. It is for good cause. It has to be established in court and by someone who would know best about raising the alarm. That's what this bill is about. If you object to, and a lot of you have, the restrictions on the physical gun or part of the gun itself, okay. And if you're going to fall back on the argument, it's not the gun, it's the individuals, it's the person. Guns don't kill people, people kill people is the rhetoric that we often heard. Then why is it so objectionable to make sure that those people who are the most threats are being watched and being cared for in a way to take them out of that position of threat? That's what this bill is about, and I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Mr. Mathis, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, this debate is about rights and about constitutional rights. And, you know, my colleague from Monterey Bay brings up a great point. We already have First Amendment rights that allow our neighbors, our coworkers, to address issues if they see them. We already have the right to do that. What this bill does, as my colleague from San Diego stated, it goes into science fiction things like the book 1984 by George Orwell. What's next? The thought police? We're sitting here looking at, I mean, we might as well call this bill the rat on your neighbor or pissed off ex-coworker bill. This gives the ability to say, hey, I don't like this guy, I heard he has a gun, and then we sick people on him. This is nonsense. Yet again, another nonsense bill. We already have existing law on the books, existing rights that allow us, if we see a problem, to address it. Our law enforcement already has hotlines and tip lines to address these issues. But yet, here we are again, under the concern of, oh my gosh, I heard this guy has a gun, he had a bad day at work, he stormed off. And now that person has the ability to go after them? What are we doing here today? We're supposed to be looking at what is just law, about creating safer communities. That's what we're talking about. This does not create a safer community. This creates a community where people are afraid to make friends. People then become afraid to socialize. You heard from our colleague from Stockton. Our mental health services already have the abilities, the tools. Let's seriously consider what we're talking about here. We are talking about a bill where if I don't like you, I can report you. That already happens anyway. I ask for your no vote. This bill does nothing for us as a society.
All debate having ceased. Mr. Tang, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With respect to my colleague from Stockton, appreciate her comments and bringing up the Tazaroff hearing, the Tazaroff ruling. Again, right now with that ruling, if a current individual actually has to utter a threat, this allows that person a little bit more leeway, greater judgment, but obviously we'll be happy to continue to work with her to refine the bill. With respect to my colleague from Orange County, I think our Second Amendment rights are very well protected. But right now, the rights that I care about are the right to go to school and not get shot. I don't want to have to walk into my office and worried that I may be gunned down. I want to make sure that I could walk in my own neighborhood and not fear for my own safety. Today's shooting at UCLA was the 186th shooting since Newtown, Connecticut, in 2012. Most of us started here in the class of 2012 right after that shooting. And I know for a lot of us, we talked about how it's a tragedy, how we were sorry it happened, how it was so unfortunate that you had first graders in their school gunned down. But what have we done about it? What have we done to stop it? Today, I'm asking you to join us to take a small step to have greater safety in our schools and our workplaces, and I respectfully ask for I vote for AB 2607.
Thank you, Ms. Ting. With that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Mr. Tang moves the call. Members, we are going to be taking up AB 1664 by Mr. Levine. Without reference to file, clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1664 by Assemblymember Levine and others, enacting into firearms.
Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. In 1989, following a mass shooting at an elementary school in Stockton where a shooter used an AK-47 to kill 5 children and wound 29 other children and a teacher, California passed the Roberti Ruiz Assault Weapons Control Act. The act sought to prohibit assault weapons that have the capacity to accept detachable magazines and inflict mass violence with specific military-style features. Unfortunately, the gun manufacturers found a way to circumvent this assault weapon ban. And 26 years later, we saw just how immediate the threat from these weapons continued to be when on December 2nd, 2015, 2 shooters used bullet button weapons to shoot 35 people in a matter of minutes in San Bernardino. 14 Californians were killed, and 21 more people were severely injured. Again, members, these weapons were supposed to be banned in the original Roberti Ruiz Act. So AB 1664 seeks to close a dangerous gap in California's assault weapons ban. Specifically, the bill adds a statutory definition of detachable magazine to clarify that bullet button guns are illegal assault weapons. And the bill also has a grandfather provision that allows current lawful owners of assault weapons enabled with bullet buttons to register and maintain their firearms. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Ms. Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I will keep this brief. You're banning, essentially, weapons that are already in use and have already lawfully been purchased. And I just have to say, I am sick and tired of people using tragedies to advance their own political agenda. It's getting old. It's sick, actually. You don't use the death of children to advance your own cause. You're going to outlaw weapons that are very commonly used, that are not used in the majority of murders that take place in California anyway. I mean, look at the statistics. I would urge a no vote.
Ms. Grove, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, rise in opposition to this bill, but I'm very offended not only by the bills that are being passed, but the legislation, the language that's on this floor. You refer to the San Bernardino shooting as an issue or an incident that took place, or the shooters. This was a blatant terrorist attack on our nation, and it should be called and labeled a terrorist attack. And you know, while we're in the subject of talking about using these incidences or these terrorist attacks to create legislation, let's talk about the pipe bombs that were illegal at the time of that terrorist attack, where nothing is being done about that. Everything that happened in the San Bernardino terrorist attack was illegal. Straw purchases, illegal. Didn't do anything to prevent, or it's not doing anything to prevent laws. These laws are not doing anything to prevent people who want to cause harm to other people. These laws are not going to do anything to prevent that. For instance, like I said, the straw purchases, already illegal in the state of California. Passing the big fat sign that says no weapons allowed on this property, that was illegal. It doesn't do anything. These laws do nothing but prevent law-abiding citizens from obtaining firearms and for exercising their Second Amendment rights. When I look at this piece of legislation on the detachable magazines, this again is just another piece of legislation that is violating the Second Amendment rights of the constituents that we all represent. And with a total of 6 million votes cast in the state of California between both parties, I would think that there is a good number of those people that support their right to bear arms. And I think that using tragedies like this to push legislation, although I believe that we have to address the the issue of murder in our state, where young people are killing young people, and the breakdown of the respect for life in this state has to be addressed. I really do believe that addressing these issues on this that violate the Second Amendment rights is something that should not be done, and it's a violation of our Constitution. I ask for a no vote, and I ask for you to at least consider the fact that violating our rights as people or citizens of the United States and violating our Second Amendment rights is just something that goes against the oath that we take every year on this floor when we swear to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The Constitution, our God-given rights, a piece of parchment paper that our founding fathers put in place, and they exercised that piece of parchment paper to say that they trust its citizenry, and they did not want their citizens to be disarmed. They knew that one day government would try to overthrow its citizens, and they put this piece of paper in place to give us God-given rights under the Second Amendment so that we would have the right to defend ourselves predominantly against government. And the only reason government tends to pass legislation to remove those rights from its citizens is because they want to exercise power and control that they were never intended to have under the Second Amendment in the first place when our Constitution was written. So I ask for a no vote.
Mr. Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 1664, simply put, bans millions of lawfully owned rifles in California. In the past, proponents for banning the sale and possession of common semi-auto firearms based upon the appearance of so-called military features on the rifles. However, AB 1664 no longer even uses that excuse. It would expand the definition of assault weapons to include all semi-auto rifles that have fixed or non-detachable magazines as defined by the California Department of Justice. Ladies and gentlemen, AB 1664 would turn hundreds of thousands of law-abiding Californians into criminals. AB 1664 is a blatant assault on our Second Amendment. It is a blatant assault on the ability of our law-abiding citizens to legally and responsibly keep themselves and their families safe. Mr. Speaker, I do have a question of the author.
Without objection.
If you had the ability, would you repeal or infringe upon or in any way modify the Second Amendment of the Constitution? And I'm guessing you'll answer that in your close, but I'd be very interested to hear your answer, because this bill and this entire package of bills simply says that California citizens will no longer enjoy their Second Amendment rights. I urge no vote.
Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members.
All right. I will allow Mr. Levine to answer that rhetorical question.
Oh.
Mr. Levine.
I mean, I just appreciate it when people seek enlightenment, and so I'll indulge my colleague from Huntington Beach to share with him some constitutional scholarship. And so I want to quote Justice Scalia himself from the District of Columbia versus Heller, where he said and wrote, "Like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose."
Mr. Patterson, you are recognized.
Thank you. I suspect that whatever I have to say or others will probably not change anybody's minds. And I suspect we could substitute the previous votes without the debate. But I think it's very important for us to remind ourselves what we're doing here. We are effectively disarming law-abiding citizens from having the technology and the ability to defend themselves. Now, I happen to own an AR-15 with a bullet button. There's a 10-shot magazine. The criminals don't give a rip about the law over the 10-shot magazine. Repeatedly, we've seen over and over again that they have modified or they have bought illegal magazines. They have also taken their firearms and determined ways of making the bullet button irrelevant. For those of us who think and deserve and have a constitutional privilege to defend ourselves, this bill creates a circumstance in which, when I am assaulted by someone with an illegal firearm, that I am going to have to fumble around with a little lever, punch out the 10, and reload. The enemy of my liberty and of my life does not have any such restriction. Self-defense is meaningless if we cannot, in a real-world circumstance, utilize our Second Amendment self-defense privileges. And this bill gets in my way of defending myself, my family, and my property if need be. It should not be at the risk of my safety and my life, let alone my Second Amendment rights, to have to fumble, take the little gizmo and pop the out of the firearm while I'm facing a barrage of gunfire. That is a real world necessity, like it or not. Chances are I probably won't utilize it. But in a circumstance like that, what you are doing here today is giving a huge edge to the criminals, and you're disarming law-abiding citizens like me.
Ms. Waldron, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members. I, too, rise in opposition to this measure. AB 1664 would make serious changes to California's firearm laws banning hundreds of thousands of constitutionally protected firearms that were never involved in any crime and were not part of the mass shootings that were mentioned. Permission to use a little prop and read?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have in my hand a little card that was part of a presentation that my son gave in school about the Second Amendment. And I just would like to read this little thing out of the mouth of babes. Criminals use guns that they steal or buy on the black market. The government and some people believe adding gun control laws will stop criminals. Criminals don't follow laws, that's why they're criminals. If we put too many restrictions on law-abiding citizens, the criminal will gain an advantage. A gun in the hands of a trained grandma is a great equalizer when a 6'3" intruder breaks in. I couldn't have said it any better than that. But basically, by banning what amounts to hundreds of thousands of commonly owned sporting rifles, AB 1664 plainly conflicts with the Second Amendment. As the Supreme Court noted, arms, quote, typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes or those in common use are protected. District of Columbia versus Heller. Should AB 1664 be enacted, it will result in immediate litigation against the state to prevent enforcement in what amounts to a de facto ban on a massive number of lawfully owned firearms that have no association with crime. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Wagner, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, we heard Justice Scalia trotted out in support of this bill, and I want to sort of highlight the absurdity of that by making it very clear to those who seem to have missed the point. The objection to this bill and to the raft of bills that have come before us is not that the Second Amendment is absolute. We all agree that there are reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions that can, in fact, be imposed on some constitutional rights, not some of the ones I mentioned earlier, say, example, the Fifth Amendment right to counsel, but on some of them. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, to take the obvious example. The problem with these bills is these are not reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. They don't get to solving the problem that we think they're trying to solve, or at least the authors tell us that they're trying to solve. My colleague from Huntington Beach and my colleague from Santee both explained in connection with a prior bill why you might want to have multiple purchases of a weapon in the course of a month, and why it is not reasonable to have that sort of restriction. My good colleague from Fresno just explained with respect to this bill why that restriction that we're trying to impose here is not reasonable when you are under a barrage of gunfire yourself. So the problem is not that the Second Amendment is absolute. Nobody here is foolish enough to make that argument, although it is written in a very clear and directive way. The problem is these bills don't get to solving the problem they're supposed to solve. And that's why it's foolish to try to pass these bills. As we had explained to us earlier, of all of the gun crimes that have been recognized and popularized in the press of recent years, I dare say, no doubt, including the one today at UCLA, where we don't have a whole lot of information yet, but we do know this. We do know this. Two things. The gun was illegal. You're not allowed to use weapons to shoot people in cold blood. And murder was illegal. We have the laws on the books. The time, place, and manner restrictions that we're talking about now are frivolous. They're foolhardy, as my friend from Fresno explained. They will not solve the problem, and therefore they are, by definition, not reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions allowing us to infringe the Second Amendment, so don't do it.
Mr. David Chu, you are recognized.
Thank you, colleagues. First, let me acknowledge the obvious, which is there are very intense feelings about this issue, and let me also explain why I'm a joint author of this bill. In July of 1993, Gian Luigi Ferri walked into the law firm of Pettit and Martin in the heart of my district, and within minutes killed 8 people, injured 6 others, in the worst mass shooting in the history of San Francisco. 101 California, San Francisco. Cleveland Elementary School, Stockton. Oikos University, Oakland. Isla Vista, Santa Barbara. San Bernardino. Mass shootings, an epidemic in our state. We know that a common factor in these mass shootings has been a shooter's ability to quickly detach magazines and then reload. There's been a lot discussed today about the Second Amendment, and our colleague from Marin County, has explained that the Second Amendment is not unlimited. But let me further explain that when it comes to assault weapon bans, there have been numerous constitutional challenges to assault weapon bans, and I think we all know that those challenges have not been successful. In fact, courts have allowed assault weapon bans to continue, and why is that? Why, after 34 students were killed in the schoolyard of Stockton Elementary School in 1989, was the California law the first assault weapons ban in the country? Why has it been upheld? It's been upheld because if you're not actually in a military war zone, I think there are many of us who don't think you should have the ability to kill as many people as quickly as possible. We know that these guns, these bullet button guns, are designed only to facilitate the maximum destruction of human life as quickly as possible. Because it's been suggested to the contrary, I just want to close by saying there are some of us who believe that these laws that we're proposing today are incredibly important because they will save lives. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Mathis, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker and members, I rise in opposition. But first, permission to read the rest of Justice Scalia's statement in the case that's been stated earlier.
Without objection.
Justice Scalia goes on to say, under any of the standards of scrutiny the court has applied to enumerate constitutional rights, this prohibition in the place where the importance of the lawful defense of self, family, and property is most acute would fail constitutional muster. Similarly, the requirement that any lawful firearm in the home be disassembled or bound by a trigger lock makes it impossible for citizens to use arms for the core lawful purpose of self-defense and is hence unconstitutional. There you have it. So, members, here we are. Here we sit. Here we debate. Once again, on restricting constitutional rights when it is our job to pass just laws. My colleague from Fresno stated he would hate to have to fumble around with a mechanism when trying to defend his family. Members, I am the only combat veteran in this body, and I believe I probably have some of the most expertise when it comes to weapons of this matter. And I can tell you for a fact, you give any common criminal about 5 minutes and a power tool, it don't matter what bullet button or what other thing you put on there, they will find a way to make that weapon a rapid-fire weapon. Again, we can continue to try to pass law that is going to restrict our righteous, our just citizens. But at the end of the day, none of this is going to stop a criminal from doing the wrong thing. Question for the author.
Without objection.
What does your bill do to stop the illegal weapons from being brought into our country?
I believe Mr. Levine will address that.
I believe the answer is absolutely nothing. We're targeting the wrong thing. Thousands upon thousands of weapons pour in on the black market. Thousands of them. But yet, here we sit, going after our citizens who have the ability to defend themselves. And yet, we have to defend ourselves against criminals, against terrorists, against gangsters that don't care. This bill does nothing to protect us. It actually hampers our ability to protect ourselves, to protect our families, to protect our loved ones, and actually, instead of bringing us one step closer to having a safer community, it's one step farther away. I ask for a no vote.
Mr. Gibson, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I would like to just respectfully ask for one, an aye vote, and two, I think this particular piece of legislation that we have before us, AB 1664, if you read again the information in here, the bullet gun, if you look and who actually need an automatic weapon to be able to put a pin in it and make it a fully automatic weapon to continue to shoot rounds that's going to have mass destruction. Who will actually need that particular weapon? And I heard one of my colleagues says that they own a gun like that. I'm sad to hear they actually own a gun like that. When we talk about protecting our lives, this particular bill does nothing to do or diminish the Second Amendment right to bear arms. What this does is stop occurrences that have been repeated by individuals who have raised their microphones and spoke on this floor. These incidents that have taken place should not take place. And I believe that if we restrict this, this ability, the ability to have this button and the ability to create a fully loaded automatic weapon, it will again save lives in our community. We need not read and continue to read newspaper after newspaper, articles after articles, or watch the news of someone turning an automatic or a gun into a fully automatic weapon. Law enforcement needs those particular weapons in order to save and protect life. Individuals such as myself, private individuals, should not have that ability to do that. And so I respectfully ask for an aye vote on 1664.
All debate having finally ceased on this item, Mr. Levine, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During this debate, we've heard a lot of people try to instill fear in us to stop us from acting. And we've seen the result of that. We've seen the result of inaction. Stockton, Columbine, Aurora, Sandy Hook, LAX, San Bernardino, San Francisco. California is looking to us to act, and the nation is looking to us to lead. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
With that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. 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 All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 41, noes 30. The measure passes.